All right, I believe I'm live today. So, welcome to Section 8 Consulting. Today, we're going to be discussing a little bit about what I do and how I can help many of you with Section 8 housing, low-income housing, affordable housing, issues with the vouchers, housing authorities, whether you're having issues with HUD. So, in terms of housing and the market that we're in, it's getting rather serious. We got a new election coming up. I know I mentioned in previous videos that we face a potential where there's going to be some problems. We know right now that HUD's main director, Marissa Fudge, is retired her career, so we're looking for a new director. She was one of the best we ever had. And we're in a tough market, especially as summer approaches. So in terms of what I know, we look at all the legislations. We look at policies, procedures, and data standards for around 3,300 housing authorities, some of the principal markets that you deal in, which is your public housing authority, better known as a PHA, and how they administrate those to you, or all the different types of vouchers. Many of you have heard of vouchers that are called Section 8 vouchers, or mainstream vouchers, or housing choice voucher. You also got HOPWA, HOPWA vouchers for those with HIV or AIDS, BAWA, which deals with concerns those that have domestic violence. There's rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, project-based housing, tenant-based housing, and these different housings and types go under subsections of federal code, like subsection 811 for those that are 18 to 61, subsection 202 to deal with both elderly, meaning 62 and older, with disabilities, and then you go into other programs like HUD-VASH for veterans. So there's a whole wide range. And when you consider these many different types of vouchers, one of the things you have to focus on is what would you actually qualify for, and is it a better voucher than just a standard or mainstream voucher? The standard pre-qualification for any type of voucher would be one, that you're principally low income. So you're looking at rents and rent reasonableness for your PHA and income limits. For most of you don't know, your income limit determines whether or not they consider you to be three categories of low income. So there's extreme low income, there's low income, and there's standard income, all three covered. So every housing authority around America will determine by its local community as to what's too much and what will be considered fundamentally too low income. By the way, guys, this is a live video. Please do feel free to sit in the background and watch. If you're brave enough, hop in there and comment, whether you're viewing this video through a phone or TV or your desktop. I know I'm old school, so I do a lot of things through my desktop. It's strange having to drive home every time or to my office to use a desktop, but part of it is I don't see well, and that means having a large monitor helps me. The phone's kind of small. All right, so good morning. I run with scissors. I've got to say that is definitely the interesting name of the day, which is Melanie Page. Good morning. Hi, Jay. I'm so glad you made it live. I'm glad, too. It's been a wild ride. And let me give you a quick update, guys. So my parents have managed to burn down their own home. Mom's now living with me and even working in the office. She's been a big benefit in that way. And I know that I had COVID there for probably the third flipping time this year for a while. So our schedule and videos have been really scant for 2023. But I got to tell you, we're picking up the pace now, especially this week, because I'm trying to get you guys prepared, because after February this year for the election season, and of course the announcement of the new presidential election the following year, things can change, defunding can happen. So trying to get you guys kind of prepared to act and react early to what you might need to solve your housing issues. Now, looking at the fundamental market as it stands, you have a lot of voucher options, but what determines how they pull their funding from PHA is really determines on how you're answering on your pre-application and application. So I want to talk about that a little bit. When you address a housing authority, they're either having one or two things happen. That's either a waiting list or they're having a lottery. So both of them require an application, a pre-application, where they determine income and other eligibilities, which means preferences. Preferences are those little things that are involved in your case where they prefer you more over another client based on certain circumstances. So, what are those big circumstances that could greatly compel a person to be farther at the top and lower at the list? Would be a person that is dealing with domestic violence is number one. Those that are going to be homeless or imminently homeless would be number two, and those that deal with disability. The more of those three you have, the better. But they're not the only ones out there. Being a senior, being a veteran, being low income, all those things matter. And the smaller of all those preferences is whether or not you live or work locally. I know a lot of housing authorities that have you believe that's the big preference, but it's not. It only actually represents about 5% of consideration. So I'm going to recognize a few other people in our live chat. Susan Kowalski. Hello, do I have to report my taxes to Section 8? Well, part of your HAP contract, which is your agreement between you, the Housing Authority, and HUD, would indicate that anytime that you have income, you have to report that every month or as it happens within 30 days. So I don't know that you necessarily need to report your taxes, but any changes to your income must be reported within 30 days or you're in violation of contract. Moving on from there, Oscar, how are you this morning? Welcome to the channel. He says, hope everything's okay with your parents and works out. Well, I get free cleaning in my home, which is a benefit, and I get to spend a lot of time with my mom, and it definitely helps because most of you know I rescue cats on my free time, what little I have, and so when we're having to feed up to 30 different cats, it's a lot of heart-pumping action. Imagine hopping out in the bed early in the morning, you haven't even had coffee yet, and you've got cats that are dying for treats and food. So every morning is an interesting one, right? All right, moving back to that. So right now we're seeing a lot of funding roll through, which means there's greater opportunities for many of you to sign up with the housing authorities. In fact, we've been posting short videos on YouTube about housing authorities that are opening. It's okay to deal with a lottery. We had mentioned there are housing authorities can base their decisions to issue a voucher on preferences on the standard waiting list, but they have lotteries, but lotteries do not take any preferences into consideration. They can literally spin the bingo wheel, and whoever gets chosen, whether they have an important case or not. So I don't know that chasing lotteries is a great idea. I mean, you can do that as a method and keep it on the back burner, but I don't think that that's going to yield a promising result. And I don't think that process can be influenced as much as those that may have preferences. So, our company, and it's section8consulting.com. It's been around, this is my 23rd year. Going into this summer will be 24. We deal with, I think, about 1,000 clients a year. It's a little less now because the pandemic, we're post-pandemic. So I don't have as many cases, but what I have noticed is the cases are much more serious. There's more cases of clients that simply don't understand. And I think the biggest factor I hear on the phone a lot when I deal with clients and do consulting is they don't have the time. They've got too much going on. They don't have a great deal of money, and they're stressed out, and they can't seem to figure things out. And I think the third biggest thing I hear is most people are pretty appalled at the way that housing authorities don't want to teach or yield any information to them, and they feel that they're in the dark and they're not apprised of any of their rights. So we try to bring a lot of clarity to that through understanding their administrative plan through the housing authority, their policies, their procedures. That way you're playing by the same book and rules in which the PHA is. Some of the bigger fundamental problems that I see throughout many housing authorities is they have a high turnover. The job at a housing authority isn't a particularly high-paying one. And so a lot of people that tend to work there go in with a good attitude to want to help people, but it's a double-edged sword. Even I know through consulting work, a lot of people have a lot of mental health problems. And so you have a good worker who wants to help, but then over time and weeks and weeks and weeks of doing that job, they learn that, or certain types of clients that will email 50 times a day, they'll call every 8 minutes, and they'll act irrationally on the phone, make great demands, or they're struggling with delusions and other things. And so the worker becomes stressed. And though you go from a person that becomes helpful to a person that becomes adversarial as an employee, and they simply get to where they don't want to deal with the phone and people's emails. So, and on the other side, the flip side of that coin is, respectively, Housing authorities are funded to make a determination as to whether you qualify for a housing voucher. They were never funded for the workers to be an advisor or a consultant. They're not going to teach you anything. At best, they might give you some information, but they're certainly not going to spend 2 or 3 hours on the phone apprising you of every right. So there's a big disconnect in information across how you're dealing with your situation, you trying to get a voucher, but not understanding the process. And then, of course, you have employees of housing authorities that become rather bitterly involved with clients and become adversarial, which makes it difficult and a bit frightening for some of you. And most clients I find that have a very contentious situation. A lot of our calls deal with families where people have tried to help, and then of course, I think we all know what it's like to live with a family member. It puts a strain on your home. So I think that if we're trying to reach out and get other resources, including vouchers, to help that person get out there and get on, start living their own life, and many others, or older children of parents that are extremely old and they're concerned that their parents are going to pass on, thus leaving them in a critical situation of potential homelessness. So I see a lot of different cases and elements out there that can effectively shake up a household. So in terms of the market currently, we're seeing a higher rate of offers of vouchers, but what we're not seeing a high rate of is there's less landlords in the market than there probably ever has been. I know that we deal with a lot of landlords, and these landlords bring it to me, and we do interviews and help them through subsidies. And that's another thing we should really discuss is the subsidy market, because outside of vouchers, I think we need to understand not only what does a housing authority offer, but how many different options and ways could you address your housing issue. So, a housing authority, besides the lottery and offering vouchers, the housing authority, if they own a property, then they can put you in it. That would be considered project-based housing, and it does not come with a voucher. Second to that, they can offer you a housing choice voucher, which means the housing authority doesn't own the building, but is giving you a coupon essentially, which is your voucher, to go out and find your own property. So it gives you the choice. Beyond that, you have what we call tenant-based housing. Tenant-based housing is another situation where you're applying as a low-income person, and you apply at a property that is designated subsection 811 or 202, and it's a subsidy or affordable housing. It doesn't necessarily require a voucher. It requires you applying at the property. And if that property is engaged in a contract with the federal government for LITCH or tax credits, then they would allow you to apply. They determine that you're low income. If you meet a disability or senior requirement, then you would be granted a subsidy for that particular apartment. The subsidies attached to the apartment. So when you move in, you're subsidized. If you decide you don't like living there or your apartment, you move out, then you no longer have a subsidy. So it comes with its own risk. It means it's not a voucher, so it cannot move. So once you leave that subsidy or affordable housing or low income housing, then you start this whole process over. So I don't highly recommend subsidies to many clients, because too many things can happen. Even a good brand new complex filled with nice seniors can eventually go take a bad element, and so you'd want to get out of there. But it becomes risky when you have a market where it's tough to find a place. It's hard to use vouchers, and so why would you lock yourself into a subsidy when you have to keep repeating this arduous process to find out the building? And most subsidies are on a waiting list anyways. So I think a housing choice voucher would be a more appropriate solution, because you don't lose it unless you move. And when you move, you get granted a certain period of time. But the main thing is it comes with portability, and you don't lose the voucher. You have it for a lifetime unless you violate the HAP contract, unless you do something to violate the lease, or you pass away or abandon the units. So we kind of talked about housing authorities, the housing choice voucher, or project-based housing. We talked about private landlords accepting your housing choice voucher or offering you tenant-based housing. So that's 4 solutions. Okay. Now we're going to talk about CES, BOSS, and emergency housing vouchers. Pre-pandemic, emergency housing vouchers were often issued through housing authorities. And through COVID, we had a special version of the emergency housing voucher. So there were two kinds. Now, as the pandemic went on, it became too big of a burden administratively to be able to offer emergency housing vouchers through housing authorities. So they relegated that process out through nonprofits. Nonprofits would sign up and become a coordinated entry system participant. And through that coordinated entry, they're able to assess. So rather than you putting an ink pen to paper, you would make contact with the agency and they would verbalize their questions to you. And suffice that you give them the correct answers, they would allow you to be assessed for emergency housing voucher. You could be assessed for rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. So let's talk about those three options that are federally funded vouchers, but they're not through the housing authority. Okay. So the first, the rapid rehousing would be good for young families that have reached a critical point where housing has become unstable or unaffordable and they need a lift. In other words, they need assistance with rent for a duration of up to 2 years. Then rapid rehousing would rapidly put them back in housing and would give them a descending payment where if your rent was $1,000, they would likely cover $1,000 the first month, maybe second and third month. And then after that, the rent they would be willing to pay against your rent would be a little less, maybe $900. And then it'd be $900 for the fourth month, fifth month, and sixth month. And then you see how it descends till it zeroes out. So rapid rehousing would only be appropriate for those that are not on fixed incomes, elderly, and retired. Now, permanent supportive housing has more characteristics of tenant-based housing and project-based housing, simply because it's kind of a segregated type of housing. So it's a building that's typically owned by nonprofits or privately owned. And the permanent supportive housing is for those that suffer from grave mental health issues that would be able to find to be able to live there, to lease up there, and it would give them other supportive services, wraparound resources like caseworkers, Meals on Wheels, and other things that you would need. So permanent supportive housing likely would not be a great option for you if you did need the extraordinary extra help. It's kind of like housing without the living aid, so you have the wraparound resources. Now, the emergency housing voucher, which most people covet the most, though it does imply emergency, it does not necessarily mean the administrative process and application to get through that process is necessarily quick. So I know that it says emergency. So throughout the U.S., I would suggest that process would likely take up to 30 days in most states, excluding the state of New York, excluding the state of Florida, excluding the state of Massachusetts, and Arizona. So California, New York, Arizona, and Florida. In Massachusetts, those states, you're looking at a 30 to 90-day timeline for an assessment, and that's if they don't have a long waiting list for that, and if you actually qualify. To qualify, there are 4 elements or acronyms we should probably talk a little bit about when it comes to CES and the ball system. So CES would be the coordinated entry system. The program is called COC, or Continuum of Care. How they assess you would be SPDAT or SPDAT, or the Service Prioritization Decision Tool. And then that information that they acquire from you, your answers, is put into another algorithm, which is called, well, it just slipped my mind, didn't it? That's what happens when you get on a long talk. But it's entered into HMIS, which is the Homeless Information Management System. And those 4 things that we were discussing in terms of acronyms are what would afford you one of 3 options. Beyond that, you have housing authorities that are state sponsored and county sponsored, but anything that's not backed by the federal government and its ability to write its checks, I don't know that I would suggest, because if it's taxpayer funded, the minute the taxpayers disagree or there's not enough funding, you could face a potential eviction when they don't actually pay your rent. So I would advise that all clients only consider options that are federally funded. All right, I'm going to move on out here into some of the comments. But first, I'm going to take a little swig of my energy drink because we have a lot to talk about. All right, Melanie Page goes on, no laundry too. Okay, Oscar goes on to say, this is why we're grateful for what you're doing to help us deal with this. Well, I certainly try, guys. Miss Rashad, how fast can you get housing, homeless, disabled, and domestic violence? Well, everything has a lot of considerations. When we talk about speed, your geographical location and the size of the city and the density of homelessness in a city can greatly affect the ability of the housing authority or even CES to be able to issue anything quickly. So states and areas where it's going to be most hardest to get are going to be in the biggest cities. Now, in consideration of disability, homelessness, and domestic violence, in virtually all other states other than New York, Los Angeles, California, the southern part of Florida, and Massachusetts, I would say that the process would yield fairly quickly. If you had all the right information, I would say you do pretty well. So, in terms of speed, I would say up to 90 days, sometimes a little bit longer. Now, in certain circumstances, if there's a particular issue going on, like say in the city of Miami, where you've got too many low-income individuals that are basically retirees, you can end up in a unbalanced situation throughout the city. Like, for instance, again in Miami, nearly a quarter bowl of people in the city actually applied for a voucher. Now, that's not very good. What it's showing is a situation that's becoming very similar to that of San Francisco, where the vast majority are have-nots, where a small majority are the haves. And that's the problem with cities like that become unaffordable for virtually anybody except for the wealthy. And that's the only reason you would have a dynamic where you've got nearly a quarter of the population of a city applying for a voucher. That's pretty ridiculous, right? But yet everything in terms of rent is astronomical, as if they ignore the lower community of people that are seniors, retirees, disabled, veterans, and so on. And so it creates a catalyst for an overheated market, basically. Just like you see playing out in California. We all knew at some point what we see in California, what everybody made comments about the state of California. I'm watching it play out through Southern California. And eventually in another decade, that would play out in my home state, Texas, because, we're hosts to Houston and Dallas. These two cities are among the top 6 biggest. And while it's remained affordable, even in our state, eventually it'll fall prey to the same game where a market will become overheated and it'll become unaffordable. And of course, job opportunities will be its lowest. So it's a tough situation. Moving on from there, I think, you look at federally funded vouchers. It means that any American in any city, in any state, could apply for any voucher in America. There are many circumstances in which a housing authority could grant portability to you. So if you lived in, say, Florida, say you lived in Miami, Florida, and you applied for a voucher in Minnesota, and Minnesota granted the voucher, you've got about a 50-50 odds they can waive portability and grant it immediately. In other words, they say, we know that you live in Miami, we know that you applied in this state, 1,200 miles away, and we're going to waive the portability and let you port it now. The other half the circumstances will not allow it because of their administrative plan. It's important to understand. Also, domestic violence victims, they have it's perfectly reasonable to be granted accommodation to request instant portability despite not living or working in the city. So again, I want to dispel the rumor of living and working. That is a preference, but it's not required by federal law. Anytime you accept and utilize federal funds, it must be available to all Americans, not just the people that are in that city. Now, the housing authorities have done a fantastic job of trying to convince people of otherwise. But that is the game, isn't it? Is to get inside people's heads to make them believe that maybe this wouldn't be available to them or somehow more difficult. And so we have to look at all the different reasons on portabilities and moves. And I think that's another thing we should importantly look at. I'm going to link you up, guys, to federal guidance for portabilities and moves so you have a better understanding uh, of what your rights are in terms of winning a voucher in another city and state where you don't live. Give me 1 minute. I'm going to link you up in this live chat. I should have had this prepared to go, but I'm like every other human. It takes me a minute to get everything prepared. So I'm going to deliver this in a .gov PDF. So let's see here. All right. So I'm going to put that directly in the chat. That should apprise you of essentially all the processes that are required by federal rules in order for you to port. So, in terms of you guys out getting out there and looking for housing and acquiring vouchers, I would suggest applying at as many housing authorities as possible. That way, you're able to get more opportunities to be able to win the voucher. And then, if you're able to do so, then you will be able to potentially acquire portability, which is a lot of what we do through casework. Now, before I close up the video at a half hour run here, I'm going to tell you this. Our company has dealt with clients in many ways. In a lot of the cases, or to be frank with you, kind of complex. And so I'm making a very simple announcement. As of April of next year, our company will no longer offer casework. And one thing that we'll be doing is lowering the cost. Despite inflation and all the problems, I'm actually going to lower the cost of casework starting today. It'll be shortly after this video. I know that we offer casework at $6.95 and at one point even $7.95. It works on demand. In other words, a lot of times when our office gets too busy, we have to find a way to slow people down, and sometimes that's by cost. So what I'm going to do is lower it to $5.95, and of course the applicable taxes. But one thing I want to give you a few warnings about, guys. Casework does take time. We run casework for 12 months with a client, and that's to sufficiently teach, educate, consult, attempt to get work with them to get vouchers from different areas of the nation. And then, of course, the portability process, which usually requires a very keen insight into building out or requesting accommodations to kind of compel the portability portion of this. Casework is only really appropriate for many of you if you've done everything that you could possibly do and you've still have not been able to yield a result to a voucher. So we're not a first option. We're a last option for most of you in terms of, have you done everything you could potentially do? Have you exhausted all possibilities? Then and only then would be quite appropriate to reach out to our company. For those of you that want to kind of pair up with our company to learn the process and walk through it a little bit, the casework wouldn't be appropriate. I would say just book a 15 or 30-minute consult and we can walk you through some of the processes that might be able to help you. So I think that everybody's ability, skill, and time is a little bit different. And so it isn't always necessary to pay for a larger segment of time when you only need to really just fill in the gaps or learn additional information. Also, really, I think we got close to a little over a terabyte of data, including a lot of policies, procedures, data standards, COC, CES, operations, legislation, direct reports, and all that. So we have probably one of the largest combinations of material related to Section 8 housing policies, rules, federal regulations, Title 24, HUD housing books, manuals. And so that kind of gives us plenty of insight. Also, we back our services with 3 attorneys at present. So they're not in my office, but we work with them to work out the aspects of doing open state requests, open public requests, and also demand letters. So it kind of helps push the cases along. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the comments here. And Melanie Page goes on to say, thank you for the manuals, are coming in handy. Terry Hopskin, I have a voucher. My problem is being able to find a place within the income limits that I'm allowed. Okay. Well, the housing search is always a tough one. And unfortunately, states do require that any person that's going to engage in apartment location and home search or yielding a service like that be licensed in the state. So our company has never been in a position. We can advise clients on what could be potentially done, but we don't actually offer any service related to the housing search part. Yes, the market is tough. I do advise that a portable housing online would be a first stop. Facebook Marketplace, real estate market is really good as well in terms of trying to find places. But to be honest with you, housing search is a pain in the ass. It always has been, and it's a little bit tougher now because of higher rents. So I think that facing that reality and just knowing from the beginning, being honest, today, housing search is kind of miserable. I think that in terms of most of our clients throughout the year tend to be able to use their request for tenancy or vouchers usually in the up to 6 week mark. So in terms, if you're putting in a lot of time for housing search, I think statistically most of our clients, it takes them about 6 weeks. But it really does depend on your ability and how much time you have in your hands to search the market. All right, moving on from there. Austrian goes on. I got to go. It's time to feed my beautiful wife. All right. Terry Hopkins, I have a landlord trying to evict me right now for a lease violation. Is this just a retaliation due to a rodent infestation? Well, to be honest with you, Teresa, I don't really know enough about your case's details or what's played out, or even considered any evidence or perspective from either you or the person you're having an issue with. In that case, I'd just say reach out to our office. We could go over the case details, see if anything could be potentially done in regards to that. But that's simply not a sufficient amount of evidence for me to actually give you a professional answer. My job always is just to be brutally honest with people, whether it offends them or not. But in this case, I simply don't have enough information really to give you an educated answer on that. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. As y'all can see, I look a little tired in my eyes. I'm bouncing between videos, and I want to mention real quick, we opened up a new website. Of course, as I begin to retire part of the services we offer at our company, as of April next year, I've been working on a store. We all have to have a little bit of a retirement check. So I'm going to use our new store we've been developing, selling a product. So if y'all guys want to check it out just for fun, it's mixedworldcoin.com. So that's www.mixed, M-I-X-E-D, worldcoins.com. For those of you that are numbnists, coin collectors, you might find some interest in that website. We've been in full development on it now for about a half a year. If not, I understand it really doesn't fit into the regime of what we do here as far as consulting in Section 8, but I thought I'd bring it up as an interest. Also, I'll be introducing one of our newest cats. We have a miniature cat, if you can believe it or not, and we call her TT. We'll bring her in the next video, see what y'all think of her. She's a little miniature cat, and she's not a kitten. I think it was a genetic anomaly. And we'll be giving an update on Bunny, our other kitten with disabilities. Missing tail, spina bifida, and a rather interesting personality. So, all right, looks like we had a few more comments. Epi, how do you find a local office like yours? I'll be interested in working with your type of office. Well, unfortunately, over 20 years, many consultants have left the field because A, it doesn't really pay a lot, and B, taking calls from many, many different clients that have severe disabilities and other issues, it has a mental toll on even consultants because you hear some pretty horrific stories. And so I probably only one of a handful left across the U.S. that still does consulting work in this particular arena for Section 8 housing and vouchers. So I couldn't tell you who's left. You'd have to look around. BZB. I'm being denied reasonable accommodation for an extended search time in Illinois. I need help. Okay, so that's a reasonable accommodation request there. Visit BZB. I'd say reach out to our office. Teresa Hopkins, I already had one consultation with you. My problem is the amount I pay for rent. I can't find another place for the same amount, but housing, when I move down, it lowers. Okay. Well, Mr. or Mrs. Hopkins, I don't know what I can do respect to that. I have to look up what information we probably worked with you in originally, the comments and questions to kind of see what more could be done. Cheryl Whitstone, tiny cat, wonderful. I have 5-pound Chihuahua. Well, our cat is exactly to the order of 3 times smaller than a normal cat. Doesn't seem to be anything unusual about her. She's just an unusually small cat. It's kind of strange. So at one point, I thought even the cat, the tail had been broke off, but it's not. It's just a really freakishly small cat that's not a kitten. So, all right, guys, enjoy your day. I'm going to move on. I'm going to make another video for our product channel that I'm rolling out. So I will see you guys tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.